Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 1 Remastered, Real Survival Mode, knife and defense items only, no damage, no alternate controls, no lighter, no audio walkthrough. This is the entirety of Jill's campaign, and you'll notice that I've made this incredibly short, roughly 46 minutes and 54 seconds. That's because I've trimmed out a lot of unnecessary downtime, because this game just embraces way too much downtime with walking moments, with moments where there aren't any enemies, with really arcadey puzzle designs, and dragged out scenarios, and it all culminates into a very underwhelming experience for a Resident Evil game. And I still can't believe this game is lauded by so many. This is a fucking overrated game. I don't really see the appeal of this game. I don't really see the survival horror aspects in play with this game. All I see is just a game that embraces some very outdated designs, with outdated enemy designs, with very bullshit enemies, with just very odd choices for designs. And it's a bore. It's a bore fest, let me tell you. But I've already elaborated a lot on these kind of tangents of Resident Evil 1 Remake in my previous walkthroughs. And, I mentioned before that I wasn't really going to do any kind of walkthrough of this game again. But that will change when I saw Ether did a run of this game, where he managed to do this entire game, knife only, no damage, and no saving. And, I'm not going to be doing any kind of no-save restriction for this game. This game is just too boring, and there's so many loading screens, there's so much downtime in play that it just really leads to a lot of fatigue and boredom. And, in order to do no-save of a game, I have to at least have a lot of respect for the game. That's why I at least did no-save for the Not a Hero DLC for Resident Evil 7. But this, it's just not worth it. I really don't see what the appeal is for no-saves in this game. This game already embraces a lot of bullshit as it is, and knife only is just the baseline way to play. But even though it is the baseline way to play, the game just embraces a lot of bullshit with its enemy designs, and I was stuck on certain encounters for hours. Like the first boss against the Cerberus, that fight was just so painful, and Jill is fucking awful at knifing. She not only does very little damage with her knife, but she also knifes very slowly compared to Chris, which doesn't make any sense. And at least it made a lot of sense in Resident Evil 0, because Rebecca wasn't exactly an elite STARS member. She was a medic compared to Billy, who was at least an ex-army ranger of some sort. But Jill? Chris and Jill are supposed to have very similar experiences in STARS, yet why do they play so differently? I don't get that at all. Why can't her speed be on par with Chris's? I mean, you're already going to give her some very crappy knife animations, like with her middle slash, when she just knifes downward and she doesn't knife horizontally. It makes it so hard to hit certain enemies. And when it came to the first boss against the Cerberus, which is not really a boss fight because it's just a reskin of a dog, I could not for the life of me counter one jump attack that they do, and the jump attack that the dogs do on this game is so bullshit. The dogs overall in Resident Evil 1 Remake are the worst dog enemy ever, because not only do they get a lot of hyper armor, but they have the ability to do a long range grab that just allows them to turn in midair. And it has phantom range. There's no consistency as to whether they choose to grab you or not, so you'll never get the chance to use a defense item very consistently. And their flinch animations, the minute flinch animation that they do when you knife them, it just doesn't afford you a lot of time to get away, and it just makes you wonder what the heck were they thinking when they designed that. It's just so bullshit. The dogs in the original version of Resident Evil 1 are better designed than the dogs in this game. There's really no sense as to why the dogs get all these weird properties with not being able to flinch consistently from your shots. But that first boss against the Cerberus was made even worse by the fact that I was playing as Jill, and Jill just could not knife a dog out of the air and just stun it whatsoever. But, after a couple of hours of actually getting that fight done, I found a way to actually get the fight done consistently, but it is still a little heavy on the RNG. I mean, to a small degree, though. But I'll explain when I get the chance. So, if you watch my previous walkthroughs of Resident Evil 1 Remake, you'll understand what my restrictions are, but the no alternate control system is something that I've never done before, and that's what I did here. I mean, this right here was just kind of like a practice run, but it eventually became the full walkthrough. But if you don't know, in Resident Evil 1 Remastered, you have the ability to choose between the original controls of the remake and the alternate controls that were introduced in the remastered version. And what the alternate controls allow you to do in Resident Evil 1 Remastered is it maps the tank controls to the D-pad, but with your analog stick, you have more fluid movement like you get in more modern games. So there's no kind of rigid turning involved when you're using the analog stick. And this is what allows you to essentially have a more balanced experience with this game, because the enemies are pretty bullshit on this game with being able to take advantage of your tank control system. That right there was very unfortunate. This zombie here can be a pain in the ass, because there's no telling if he's going to just walk like all the way to the railing, or he's going to come around the corner. And if he walks to the railing, you can easily get behind him because he'll do the very slow grab. But if he decides to come towards you and he doesn't do the long range grab, you're going to get grabbed very easily. Like, the zombies on this game have two different grabs whenever you're in front of them. They have a long range grab and a short range grab. Most of the time when you first enter a room, the zombies will tend to do the long range grab, where you'll stand like quite a distance away from them, just standing still, and they'll lunge towards you, but they won't actually hit you. That being said, though, I still take extra caution with that move, and I just use the, like you see right here, how I'm using the aiming animation to back up. I use that to my advantage when it comes to getting past the long-range grab, and here's the Cerberus boss fight. After I use the dog whistle, I'm just going to stand in this corner right here, and the dog's going to come after me. Hopefully he does the short-range grab. He'll tend to do the long-range grab at a very far range before he does another one or another short-range grab, but all you gotta know is you gotta knife him the moment he starts his short-range grab, because what happens is when you cancel him out of the animation, he'll try to do the long-range grab, and because he's so close to me, it will always be a guaranteed grab. There won't be any moments where he'll just jump towards you to try to do the long-range grab, but it fails, but you end up taking damage in the process. There won't be any moments like that because he's so close to you. And I'm just going to run to the other corner, and I'm just going to repeat the same process, and he'll be dead after 2 defense knives. The defense knives on this game take off 50% of an enemy's life. That's at least with the basic enemy types. It will work very well against the Crimson Head. The tasers that Jill has, it will take off 75% of an opponent's life. And then with the flash grenades that Chris gets, it will actually kill off an enemy entirely if you either shoot the flash grenade when it's in their mouths, or if you just wait for it to detonate. If you were to do knife only in the remake, it's best to do it with defense items. Like, this is practically the baseline way to play when you're not being so reliant upon the alternate controls. And this game, it feels like it was designed with the alternate controls in mind, because some of the enemies, like, the fact that the zombies can do the short range grab just out of nowhere, and they have to be so close to you in order to do it, and it's almost impossible to run past them at that point. Like, it just feels like it's designed for the alternate controls in mind. And then with the dogs, the fact that the dogs are so fast and they have such fluid movement and they aren't so impacted by the tank controls, and then you have other enemy types that just feel like they're more befitting for a modern game, you can definitely tell that the alternate control system just balances out this game, and that the original controls are just pretty bullshit in allowing the enemies to cheat. And, you know, I can't really understand why people find any kind of, like, scary factor out of the fact that the character is relying upon alternate controls, tank controls, in order to actually serve as the basic movement system, because it just allows the enemies to really gain a very cheap advantage over you. And really, this game just embraces way too many simple designs. It doesn't try to add a lot of complexity to the enemies. It doesn't try to add a lot of complexity to yourself. And it's just a very bare bones experience. That could easily be a substitute for other survival horror games. Like, the format that is used for this game is really no different to other old school survival horror games, like Silent Hill, for instance. And, you know, I feel like the original games are a lot better than the remakes, especially when it comes to Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2. I mean, I think with Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's a little different. Resident Evil 3 Remake, a lot of the mechanics that were first introduced in the original version of Resident Evil 3, they're a lot better in the remake. I mean, even though the remake does cut out a lot of content from the original version of Resident Evil 3, but that's not such a big deal, because the only reason they cut out the content from the remake of Resident Evil 3 is to make the game befitting for speedrunning, just like Resident Evil 2 Remake, because that's just a great example of new Capcom trying to stick to what works, because they listen way too much to their fans. And speaking of new Capcom, I wonder what I should call this team that made Resident Evil 1 Remake that feels so outdated. I should honestly just call it, like, outdated Capcom, and maybe, like, some people within outdated Capcom came into new Capcom, and they just caused the gameplay in Resident Evil 2 Remake and onward to feel very, very bare bones, and, you know, not really so creative and ambitious, and not really something that allows it to differentiate itself from other survival horror games. That's probably what I should call this developer that made Resident Evil 1 Remake, because so many designs put in place with this game, they really feel questionable at best, and I really elaborated on these points greatly in my original walkthroughs of Joel's campaign and Chris's campaign. And I still find it hard to believe that there's a trophy in the remake and remastered version of Resident Evil 1 where you have to beat the entire game knife only, without using any defense items, without using the lighter, and without using any stomps. And if you've seen my performance in those walkthroughs where I was putting that restriction into mind. The gameplay looked so stupid. It looked really, really bad and just so dragged out and just so clunky. And I was having to exploit a lot of holes in the designs. And if that's what the developers are expecting you to do with such a trophy like that, and the trophy is kind of there to represent a baseline way to play, that right there is just very feeble, and it's just a clear indication that this team really settled for less when trying to develop the baseline way to play this game. Like, going out of your way to get the guns on this game just turns this game into New Game Plus, and you're not seeing the simple designs put in place. You're giving the illusion that this game is complex in design, but it actually isn't. And it just gives this game way more credit than it deserves. It's a very bare bones experience, and really it feels just as bad as Resident Evil 2 Remake, maybe even worse though. Although Resident Evil 2 Remake, because of the fact that it released after Resident Evil 7, which was a significantly better Resident Evil game, and easily one of the greatest Resident Evil games ever, New Capcom had the opportunity to really capitalize on the complex nature of Resident Evil 7, but they didn't. They just settled for less, just like the 1996 style of the older Resident Evil games, and also with this version of Resident Evil. Like, I don't get why they settled on this for Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's just so disappointing, but again, I've already talked about this tangent, so I'm not going to talk about this tangent unless I decide to do so later on in this video. But let me just talk about what's happened so far. So right now, a lot of the encounters have been very simple. We've just dealt with Yawn. Whenever you give Richard the serum, he will appear there, and Yawn is a lot easier to get past because he doesn't attack you immediately, and you're not placed in a very awkward position, unlike Chris. So you are able to get the death mask easily, and then you can easily triangulate where Yawn is based on the sound effects. Actually, no, not the sound effects, because the sound design on this game is shit. It's so dishonest, just like Resident Evil 2 Remake and occasionally Resident Evil Village, and it's just there to give the illusion of horror when it's just another cheap handicap that just allows the enemies to feign lethality, and it's just another great example of why the fixed camera angle is so shit in these kind of games. Really, the only game where the fixed camera angles made any sense was probably Code Veronica, because I think the fixed camera angles in Code Veronica were done a lot better than the original games, and also with this game. But going back to other tangents that I was discussing, the alternate controls, I was mentioning that in the remake of Resident Evil 1, you had no alternate controls, and you had to rely upon the tank controls, which were a very rigid kind of tank control system that you utilize in Resident Evil 4, only it feels a lot better in Resident Evil 4. But if you were to utilize the original controls for Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 1 Remastered, the game really feels unbalanced in certain parts, because the enemies just take advantage of that kind of movement penalty. Like, this right here, the Elder Crimson Head, this was another encounter that took hours for me to do, and ironically, I had already found the strategy to deal with this guy, because if you stand to his side, or like directly behind him, but rather to his side, he'll try to do a grab on you, and if he grabs you from the front, you'll be able to use a defense item against him, and while he's stunned from your dagger, you can then get to his side, and I'm going to do it right here. So he grabs me, I use my knife on him in order to deal 50% of damage to him, and then I stand to his side so that he will always do the grab. That being said, though, the placement of your character in relation to where he is made harder due to depth perception issues regarding the fixed camera angle, and the fact that his AI can be a little cheesy at times, and he'll choose to run around a bit before he decides to grab you. So there's still a lot of RNG involved, and even Carcinogen SDA agrees that the enemies are pretty random in this game. But again, that doesn't warrant the use of the guns whatsoever. Really, the only time the guns are even warranted is when you're playing on invisible enemy mode. And it's just a very pathetic way that the developers have tried to force you to use the guns. Like, it just shows a lack of confidence in their enemy types, that they're having to resort to such a supernatural design choice in a game that is entirely grounded in reality when it comes to its horror. And the enemy placements are no different at all. Oh, by the way, here's Lisa. So her hitboxes are pretty shit, but right here, the reason why I go up the stairs instead of running past her is because it's so hard to get any kind of consistency when you're not using the alternate controls, so that's why I tried to bait her out by using the stairs and then running past her when she's in recovery frames. But, you know, having to turn all your enemies invisible and then just not changing up the enemy placements at all, and then just slapping the faces of everyone who was in the animation department when they saw all their hard work go down the drain with this poor excuse of a difficulty mode called Invisible Enemy Mode. Like, Invisible Enemy Mode is just a poor excuse for a difficulty mode, and it's only there to serve as a cheap shortcut to artificially increase the difficulty of the game. And if you're already going through Real Survival Mode knife only, and Invisible Enemy Mode is just forcing you to use all the weapons, and the weapons just make this game in the New Game Plus. Is Invisible Enemy Mode really a good excuse for a difficulty mode at that point? I really don't think so. Like, you know, you're already stacked up on ammunition as it is in this game, and because the knife is really your only good tool in this game feels more like an action game, in all honesty, with its tone, with its, like, cringy dialogue, with its very poor enemy designs, and just really odd enemy behavior. Like, I don't really see why this game is called a survival horror game. I mean, so what if it's a remake of the original version of Resident Evil 1, which was a survival horror game? Like, this game doesn't feel like a survival horror game most of the time. And there are better Resident Evil games than this pile of garbage. Like, the only reason people like this game is because it's a remake of the original version of Resident Evil 1. And if you were around during that time of Resident Evil 1 on the 1996 version, then you're pretty much letting nostalgia cloud your judgment at that point. And, you know, it's exciting for people to, like, have all that nostalgia return to them if they played the original version of Resident Evil 1, and that's just enough to warrant like 9s out of 10s or 10s out of 10s for this really pathetic excuse for a game. And I still can't believe people like Under the Mayo or Sphere Hunter embrace this game so much when it doesn't hold a candle to what games like Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 established as being like a new generation of horror. And the things that Resident Evil 4 did especially, like, Resident Evil 4 is a game from 2005, and the remake of Resident Evil 1 released back in 2003, and it's just a 2-year gap in between. So 2 years doesn't exactly afford the developers a lot of time to really do anything creative, but Resident Evil 4 proved me wrong, or proved other people wrong, and the things that they did with Resident Evil 4 when it came to different enemy types and different kinds of mechanics, and it just feels more like a next-gen game than any other game out there. Like, that game was built to last, but Resident Evil 1 Remake and Remastered, they just don't feel like they're games built to last, and I don't really see the replayability involved with them at all. They're just very underwhelming games that embrace some very douchey designs. But, you know, I haven't been talking about what I've been doing so far because the Residence is so easy. There's barely any threats here aside from one zombie that's in that room that you can just run past when you're behind him, when you enter the room that has the bookshelves that you move out of the way that reveals this ladder. But then getting out from here is a little bit tricky because what the zombie does is completely random. There's no telling if he does the long-range grab or the short-range grab. But if he decides to do the short-range grab rather than the long-range grab that he just did, reset the room by going down the ladder. That's the only way to at least control what kind of behavior the zombies elicit as their first attack. So using that to your advantage, you can easily get past that zombie. And then these bees, there's no real threat involved with them whatsoever. You know, I don't know why people say there's a lot of enemy diversity in this game. Like, really the only enemy types you're encountering are just zombies, dogs, hunters, and those chimera you encounter in the lab area. That's just 4 enemy types, and I'm not even counting any of the gimmick enemies because they're just one-time enemies that aren't exactly that intriguing. Like, a lot of the other enemy types are very forgettable, like the sharks, for instance, or with the bees. And they don't really offer that much of a threat, in all honesty. But you're encountering the zombies, dogs, hunters, and the chimeras a lot more frequently than these other enemy types, and therefore they're the ones that should actually be classed as enemy types rather than the other enemies. And it's just 4 enemy types, like, that's hardly befitting for an enemy diversity. And then you're going to make these enemies very bullshit. At least Resident Evil 7 knows how to make its enemies well designed and accommodating for like lethal enemies and complex game design. Like, the molded in Resident Evil 7 are a lot better than these enemies. And I'm not even sure what I would say about the enemy types you encounter in Village. Because I feel like the level of stupidity involved with some of the ways the enemies are placed in the environment and with some of the other bad designs that they have, they can almost be on par with that of Resident Evil 1 Remake in a sense. And then with some of the bosses in Resident Evil Village as well, they feel like they were befitting for Resident Evil 1 Remake at times. Oh, but this right here is a great example of a zombie trying to do a short-range grab on me, and without any possibility of running past him, I reset the room so that he'll mainly do the long-range grab as his first attack, and this allows me to get past him. And you gotta move very fast as well, because the zombies have the ability to cancel their grab animation at times. And it's just so unfair. I mean, in a game that is already embracing like original controls, and the tank controls aren't exactly the most fluid of like movement systems ever, you're then going to give the zombies the ability to spam grab randomly at times. Like, what? I don't see the justification for that. At least in Resident Evil 7 it made sense, because the sprint counter in Resident Evil 4 returned in Resident Evil 7, so it made sense why the molded could have like 1-frame attacks. It was a sprint counter, essentially. But there's no justification for it at all. And if you're in a narrow corridor and they decide to spam grab, it's going to feel very, very bullshit, and you'll lose out on a defense item. But just look at this, by the way. Look how much I progressed through the game, and this is the amount of time you spend actually doing stuff in Resident Evil 1 Remake. 20 minutes into this game, and I'm already at the Hunters right now. And this is roughly the 75% point of this game. Not really the 50% point, I would say. And I'm already here. Like, it's crazy just how much downtime they put into this game. Downtime that isn't even as intriguing as some of the downtime moments you get in Resident Evil 7. And people try to attribute this whole downtime statement to Resident Evil 7 more so than Resident Evil 1 Remake, which just clearly shows a biased thinking involved. Resident Evil 7 has way more stuff that you're actually doing compared to this game. And at least the enemy types are demanding, the bosses are a lot more demanding, like the weapons actually feel like they serve a purpose, and Ethan actually feels like he controls a lot better, and he actually fights a lot better than Jill or Chris do in Resident Evil 1. Like, a seemingly normal individual with no fighting experience fights enemies better than these characters? Are you fucking serious? What is up with that? And I'm glad as well, because at least Ethan Winters feels like a normal, common-sense individual in that sense, but these characters... they're elite members of STARS, and they struggle so much against a simple zombie. What is up with that? That just makes no sense at all. And it's just such a ludonarrative dissonance that really takes me out of the experience most of the time with this game. And that's probably why Ethan Winters played like crap compared to how he was in Resident Evil 7, because apparently in Resident Evil Village he received military training, but it seems with all that military training, all the things he could do in Resident Evil 7 just aren't possible in Resident Evil Village. And I bet it's because he was trained by the same people who trained Jill and Chris in this game. And they're pretty much fools in this game, and they don't even have as interesting a personality as Ethan Winters. Like, I don't know why people say Jill and Chris are so appealing in this game. They're such boring and bland characters in this game that they don't exactly have enough dialogue in this game to really warrant remembering them. At least in the later games, this was not so much the case. And, that's why Chris eventually became my second favorite Resident Evil character in the later games. Not so much in this game, because he's just a dunderhead in this game. Same with Jill. It's like when Enrico gets shot, and Jill doesn't even try to investigate where the shot came from. Almost as if, like, she didn't even hear the shot coming. And then with Chris, like, Chris has some very weird dialogue in this game, and he doesn't exactly feel like a smart character in this game. And it doesn't really display his kind of experiences with STARS. I'm guessing that's why the STARS members were easily wiped out in Resident Evil 3, and Jill was the only one left. And, that's another thing as well. Why is it that Jill plays so differently in Resident Evil 3 compared to Resident Evil 1? Like, it's not like that much time passed between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 3. I bet it was like a couple of weeks, I believe. But why is it that she plays so much better in Resident Evil 3 compared to this game? That right there is a little confusing. But not really something to dwell on, because that's just a great example of the ludonarrative dissonance of the older games. But now we have Yawn here, and Yawn is a pathetic fight. This is 17 minutes that have sped up to about 8 minutes. This right here is a great example of why simple designs in these kind of games only serve as a hindrance to a game rather than any kind of help at all. And the whole idea of simple designs I really need to talk about, because one of my subscribers had actually mentioned something on like simple designs. So this is from my subscriber. His name is LifeFailout000, and he said he had a different kind of perspective on survival horror compared to me. And he mentioned that the enemies being more lethal, aggressive, and in greater numbers to the point of demanding smart use of ammo is something that the classics could learn a thing or two from, but only with certain limits. But even still, though, as it stands, he never really found any kind of complex enemy designs to really balance out the lack of helplessness. And this is because the player still has so many offensive and defensive capabilities that are required to offset these more dangerous enemies. And he said it's an inevitable trade-off that will always make me feel too capable. He doesn't feel a need to survive in those games like Resident Evil 4 through 6, and I feel like getting a higher kill count. This is one of the reasons why I think simplistic game and enemy designs can be a strength to games like Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, for instance, not a weakness. They're sterling examples of less is more in a very refreshing way. There's an art to evoking a sense of dread and helplessness via simple enemy designs, which is perhaps why Resident Evil 1 Remake is so repeatedly lauded by so many, but, I mean, it's hard for me to agree with this one, because look at what you're seeing right now. Look at the thing I am doing with Yawn right now. This is a great example of a simplistic enemy design that doesn't offer any kind of complex designs that really warrant any kind of intelligent use of ammo. It's just move around this bookshelf and just knife him when he decides to go around the back. Like, if you try to get close to Yon, by the way, his hitboxes are very shit. He can hit you without touching you. I have this saved in the Poor Designs of Resident Evil 1 Remake Part 1 video. And I still need to add a lot more, because I'm still making it, but this right here is a great example of one of the many reasons why simple designs in games just don't allow the games to feel like survival horror games. Just feels so goofy, and the game doesn't really do a good job of concealing this kind of behavior. And this is why it's just best to do this rather than actually wasting ammo. Like, if you waste ammo on this guy, you're just going to not have enough ammo for the other enemies. And this guy takes a beating. He takes like 12 magnum shots, 6 assault shotgun shots, and like a couple of pistol shots before he eventually dies. Does that really seem acceptable? And, I have seen the acid rounds do a lot of damage to him. Like, apparently 5 acid rounds did kill this guy, but I'm pretty sure that if I'm using a magnum or a shotgun against him, it should do roughly like equivalent damage. But apparently it's not the case here. But this is what simple designs lead to. It just leads to very dragged out scenarios like this, of just relying upon this one simple method to get the fights done. This is a 17-minute encounter, and that right there was very dangerous. I completely got messed up because I didn't see where he was. I assumed he was coming around, but he wasn't, because his pathing is just so awkward due to the simple nature of the tank controls that the enemy types have on this game. But it's hard for me to agree with what my subscriber said. I don't see any kind of like skill involved with simplistic designs like this, because this is something that a high schooler could do easily. This is something that developers like Silent Hill's developers would try to do, and Silent Hill is already a very shit game series with how simple its enemies are, and with how bullshit their enemies can be at times. And it's just so laughable at that point. If you haven't seen CryptEngine SCA's walkthroughs of Silent Hill, you should just see it. And if you don't recognize how like awkward the enemies are designed in those kind of games, and how simple they are, then something's seriously wrong with you, and you're not human. Like, this game is way too simple in its designs. It doesn't even try to do anything creative with some of its first bosses. Like, you fight the dog, and you fight a Crimson Head as 2 of the first bosses, and can you really consider that to be, like, intriguing enemy design at that point, when you're just going to be fighting reskins of enemies that you're already going to be encountering, like, normally in the entire game? Like, it just discredits their role as bosses, and that's not even mentioning the kind of problems that they have. And I have a lot of bloopers saved of those kind of moments happening, but I'll show them in my Poor Designs, the Resident Evil 1 remastered video series. But those are just shit bosses. And then we have Yon here. Yon is just completely crap in this game. And then Plan 42. Plan 42 just has a lot of problems. And it's really only befitting to fight Plan 42 as Chris after you use the Vigil, because he has way too many tentacles whenever you're fighting him. And the fight that I got as Jill at one point that I posted on my channel, it was like a 19-minute encounter. And at any moment I could have taken damage from the acid that just comes all over the room when his core is exposed, and it's just completely random, to the very awkward hit detection on the tentacles, to just the moments where the tentacles hit you for no reason. Like, it's comical at that point. It just leads to very frustrating gameplay, and it's all the result of a very simple design philosophy that this outdated team at Capcom just tried to embrace with this game. And then to add even more insult to injury, they then try to make a trophy for doing this game knife only with additional restrictions that really bring these problems to light, almost as if this is the game they wanted to make. Like, at that point, can you really take this developer seriously? Can you really take outdated Capcom seriously at that point? It's like how, with new Capcom, how they tried to market Resident Evil Village as being done knife only by putting that one challenge in. I can't believe they had the gall to put in a challenge on Resident Evil Village where it says you have to beat the game with close combat weapons only. Yet on Village of Shadows difficulty, the game is not designed for that kind of restriction, and the only possible way to get that done is to use New Game Plus. Or, if you're not wanting to use New Game Plus items, you just play on easy difficulty. So the developers are intentionally saying it's best to play on easy difficulty for these kind of challenges. There's so many challenges in Resident Evil Village that can only be done on easy difficulty, or even if they can be done on Village of Shadows difficulty, it's just more practical to do them on easy difficulty. Like, why are you forcing the player to play your game on an easier difficulty? And that is meant to belie the true nature to your game. Like, why are you trying to force the player to play on an easier difficulty for a survival horror game? And then why are you trying to make the player do a restriction that isn't befitting for the kind of design philosophies you put into Resident Evil Village? The game is not designed for close combat weapons in mind, unless you play on the easier difficulties. And even then, Like, when you're looking at Lady Dimitrescu, when you're looking at Heisenberg, when you're looking at Mother Miranda, do you really think those fights are practical, knife only? Or even with, like, Daniela, Cassandra, or Bella, do you really think those fights are practical, knife only? Or close combat weapons only? And then you're having to make the player go on New Game Plus in order to make the run practical? What is this lack of seriousness involved? Why do they not design these challenges around the harder difficulties, and why don't they actually show a little bit more respect to their fucking game? Like, just seeing that challenge in Resident Evil Village, there is definitely a clear lack of respect displayed by new Capcom when I just saw that challenge in the challenges list. Like, if the developers are not going to take their game seriously, why should I take their game seriously? And ironically, I do take Resident Evil Village seriously in certain parts. I take it a lot more seriously than Resident Evil 1 Remake, that's for sure. Resident Evil Village is a lot better than Resident Evil 1 Remake. But going back to Resident Evil 1 Remake, the whole idea of the developers designing a trophy for knife only with additional restrictions, this isn't a matter of respect or not. It's a matter of, this is what the developers wanted this game to be. Like, unlike Resident Evil Village, which had a close combat weapon trophy that was in a game that was designed for all of the weapons and not just close combat weapons, so the disrespect really shows there. Resident Evil 1 Remake has a knife-only trophy for a game that is actually designed for knife-only in mind, but mainly when you're using the old controls. If you're using the OG controls, you have to do knife-only with defense items if you want to stand a chance, or if you're not caring about the no damage restriction, which just further shows that the game really doesn't know what it's thinking. If you're just spamming healing items, you can get the games done knife-only, so where is the incentive to indulge in any of the weaponry? Where is the incentive to actually deal with some of the enemies? Like, where is the incentive to actually, like, take your game seriously? Like, I'm just not seeing it here, and this is definitely the game they wanted to make. It's like they are intentionally trying to show there is a less tedious way to actually play this game, and not have to deal with any other poor designs we put in place with this game. And if you can actually stomach the clunky controls, the terrible animations put in place with your knifing, the dragged out scenarios, the really odd choices of enemy placements, then you can actually do this game knife only. But why they want you to just stomach all that for this kind of restriction, I really don't understand that. And it's just a great example of a developer trying to take a very lazy approach to a game, and it just demonstrates a lack of confidence. It's like what I described when, in my first walkthrough of Resident Evil 1 Remake, I described the whole moment where during the first Cerberus boss fight, you had those sets of green herbs there, and the reason why they were put there is likely because outdated Capcom knew that they designed dogs very poorly in this game. So rather than actually fixing the issues with the dogs, they just instead put in a bunch of free heals for you so that you can then do that encounter very well without any kind of hassle, and then you can do the rest of the game without any kind of hassle, and you can amass a lot of first aid sprays and green herbs in order to deal with other trash fights like with the Elder Crimson Head or with Plan 42. It's such simple design philosophies like that and simple thought processes that really make me not respect this game as a Resident Evil game. Same with Resident Evil 2 Remake. And like I said, this is not a matter of a clear lack of respect on outdated Capcom's part. This is a matter of this is the game they wanted to make, and it really shows. Because I'm not having to deal with a lot of other tedious designs put in place, and also the game just feels like it flows better, and you're not having to go out of your way to break the pacing of the game to get a bunch of pointless weaponry, and then you're not having to deal with the stupid inventory system, which is just a very odd choice for an inventory system. And this is how you want to play this game. And it's just making it very hard for me to really respect this game, and the bad designs that it embraces, and the very odd thought processes that went into it. And like I said, it's the same case for Resident Evil 2 Remake, and I think that's all I'm going to say right there. And to refer back to a previous tangent regarding Life Failout 000, like, the whole idea of simple design somehow leading to a skillful and somewhat refreshing way to approach a game, all it does is just lead to a lot more questions. And it's why I just can't really see eye to eye with what you've just discussed in that one comment that you left in one of my other videos. So that's really all I have to say about that. And as I've been talking about this, I've just killed Yawn, and I've been doing all the other sections. And getting past those dogs when you're trying to use the battery on the elevator can be very tricky. And when you are approaching the dogs from the front and then they stand still in order to go into the aggressive state, they're a lot easier to run past. But if you're behind them, and then you run past them while they're going into that animation where they have to transition into their aggressive state, the chances of you getting hit by a long-range grab are pretty high. And also right here, we have Black Tiger. Black Tiger is very random. I get very lucky here because for some unknown reason, after he does the charge, he instead chooses to taunt me. I've never seen this behavior before. Normally after the charge, he tries to do his acid spit on me, but I get very lucky, and once again, it is just a great example of very inconsistent enemy behavior that I really don't understand. It comes across as being more of a programming error rather than being an intentional design choice on the developer's part to somehow induce a feeling of dread or helplessness. And it's probably also there because of the fact that the game is designed for knife only, so they have to put all these very weird limitations on the enemies to allow knife only to be possible. And that's what we got with the Black Tiger fight. And I'm still amazed that people can still find any kind of enjoyment out of inconsistent enemy behavior or broken designs like with bad hitboxes or phantom range. And they disregard all that entirely just to remain in blissful ignorance to actually enjoy the game for what it is, when in actuality all that does is just reinforce a lot of bad designs put in place in future titles. In fact, this is actually the perfect time to talk about a tangent involving a comment someone left behind in my Bella boss fight video, which is honestly a very retarded comment. So I'm sure this guy probably hasn't read anything in my video at all, and oh shit, he deleted the comment, never mind. So much for that. I won't be able to actually discuss what I was about to read in that one comment, because he just deleted it. But I can read the first part of it. So he mentions that this mode is supposed to be insanely difficult. It says survive the unsurvivable in the description. You'll need to restart a lot, die a lot, run past 99% of the enemies. If you do this, then you can do the game. Like, I mean, it's obviously going to be hard without infinite ammo and with the merchant, but like, why are you saying all this? Like, everything you're saying is just completely redundant. So why are you trying to validate new Capcom's broken design philosophies with Bella? And why are you saying that this is like an acceptable excuse for a boss fight and it's meant to be insanely difficult? Like, how can you look at that fight and call it acceptable? How can you excuse the laziness present with Bella's boss fight on Village of Shadows difficulty and with the other lazy designs put in place with Village of Shadows difficulty? How dare you try to pass yourself off as someone who understands difficulty when you don't even understand what a functional game is? And it's such a shame he deleted this comment, because I really wanted to read the full entire comment and really get my thoughts out. Probably should have saved it. But so much for that tangent. But that right there is just a great example of someone who wants to remain in blissful ignorance and just completely ignore all the problems in the game, not really understanding the major consequences put in place. Like, you know a great example of a major consequence? Designing a game for knife only. The fact that the developers designed Resident Evil 1 Remake for knife only, they caused a lot of the other designs put in place to just be watered down and remain very simple to allow you to do these kind of restrictions, and it doesn't really help that you have a tank control based system. So because of the fact that the tank control is meant to be the base default system of movement, and it doesn't afford you the best amount of fluidity of movement, a lot of the enemies have to be dumbed down as well, and they have to embrace a lot of very simple designs with their enemies. And also, they don't exactly put a lot of effort into ensuring that their enemies are going to be well designed when it comes to their hitboxes. And Lisa right here is a great example. Lisa can just choose to stand still for no reason, and then there are also moments where her hitboxes are really shit. Like right there, I don't know how she didn't hit me with a bad hitbox, but I have been hit by that attack when it hasn't even touched me. She has phantom range on some of her hits, and then she has a lot of lingering hitboxes on her attacks where she can actually get the hit out after the attack is done. And that right there, that's a big slam that she then follows up with a back attack in order to punish you for trying to run past her. It's not consistent though. There are times when she chooses not to do the back attack, so you gotta bear that in mind. But if she does the back attack, you're free to run past her. And I'm just trying to get her over here, and she chooses not to do the back attack. Actually, she did it right there, but that was a different back attack. It wasn't part of the combo. And all you need to do now is just push this, and that is the end of this fight. And now we're about to make our way over to the laboratory area. And the laboratory area wasn't so bad, but the Tyrant was proven to be a pain in the ass, because it's a lot easier to do when you have the ult controls. And the same concept still applies, where you can just get behind the Tyrant and he doesn't do anything while he's turning. It's just trying to stay behind him to the point where he actually stops, and then you can then knife him. It's a lot harder to do with the tank controls. It's a lot more cumbersome, I should be saying, not really hard. And the amount of times I got hit by the Tyrant because of that, it's very frustrating. And the Tyrant is really the only good boss on this game, because it actually feels befitting for knife only, given that with such paradoxical thinking, because he doesn't do anything while he's turning, you can then knife him safely. And that just allows it to be a lot more like conventional when actually satisfying the whole restriction of knife only compared to the other bosses. Every other boss doesn't really feel that good for knife only. And even then, they can still be done with defense items if you're using the OG controls, or without defense items if you're using the old controls. And that right there was very unfortunate. This guy, he's most of the time going to be on this side, but because of depth perception on the fixed camera angle, I couldn't tell if I was close to the right wall or not, so I lost a defense item. Not really important to note, because I'm going to be able to save on a lot of defense items. And something I actually learned about the chimeras in this section, the stun gun actually kills them instantly. So the Chimera is really the only exception to this rule where the stun gun can actually remove 75% of an opponent's life. Apparently with the Chimeras, it removes all of their life, which is definitely really cool. But again, the developers don't really understand the value in that if they're then going to be putting a restriction where you have to do knife only without the defense items, and without the lighter, and without using the stomp. But that right there, I killed this guy because this guy is always here. This is not some random chimera. This guy is always set to be in this spot. And he can be a nuisance when you are trying to bring the fuel capsule over here. And now we're just going to make a move. And I should mention that the two zombies coming up, they're both pretty hard to get past. This one here is probably the best one to get past. But going from this side of the room, it's a lot harder to do, because his pathing is so weird. Like, the zombies have some very weird pathing on this game where they tend to go left or right. Like, you know how in a car, for instance, how you're holding a steering wheel and sometimes your hands just kind of go left or right a bit because you're just kind of drifting? Well, that's just what it feels like with the zombies, and I assume it's there just to give you some kind of opportunity to run past them, which again is another design indicative of the fact that this game is designed for knife only. I mean, aside from this right here, where there is really no possible way for me to actually get past this guy with just the OG controls and the fact that I have the fuel capsule. If I was using the alternate controls, that would be different. Although what I could have done is just hug the right-hand side of the camera and then gone back to the left in order to actually influence this guy's pathing, because that's what I did previously in my first walkthrough of Joel's campaign. And that probably could have worked. But either way, I'm sure I would have been screwed by the really weird pathing on the zombies. There's just a lot of goofy designs put in place with the enemies on this game that really make you not take the game seriously. And I still can't believe someone posted on my Last of Us Part 2 walkthrough, why am I not scared of the Crimson Heads? Why am I not scared of the Hunters? Why am I not scared of the Chimeras? Because their AI is just so weird, and they don't exactly look the most intimidating, and they have a lot of goofy behavior to them. And they're also pretty broken enemies as well, with the kind of designs that outdated Capcom decided to favor for them. I mean, Hunters, why do they have the ability to just stick up your ass and just run with you at a speed that's way faster than you, and there's no chance of getting away? You can't even dodge the slash that they do if they're that close to you. And then, like, Chimeras have some really weird grab detection whenever they're on the ceiling. And if they are on all fours, they can be a pretty annoying enemy. And then with Crimson Heads are a lot more broken than any of those enemies, because they have some lingering hitboxes, they have a lot of range on their grabs, and the movement, when you're using the OG controls, doesn't feel befitting for this kind of enemy. Right here, however, the movement, it's befitting for the Tyrant to some degree, but you'll notice right here, look how hard it is for me to stay behind this guy. Like, he lingers around just walking for a very long time, and every time he turns, I'm just going to knife him, but only once, because the amount of times I've knifed more than once and I've been hit because of how awkward this guy's pathing is, and with how much the tank controls really impact any kind of fluidity of movement, it was really proving to be very frustrating with this entire encounter. But eventually this guy will go down. This guy with the OG controls, knife only without taking any damage, it's about a 3 to 4 minute encounter. And with alternate controls, it's like a 1 minute encounter. That's just the difference in performance when you're having to modify your control scheme. And again, this game just feels a lot more befitting for the knife only restriction when you're just doing it with alt controls. But why this truly was in the remake, I don't know. But it's probably because of the healing item aspect. Like, I can't really understand why a developer wants to encourage people to just spam healing items like crazy for a restriction. The whole point of healing items is to just serve as kind of a safeguard, or like training wheels, for instance, to help you get adjusted to the game. And given the way the healing items just take up as much space as like a big weapon like the grenade launcher, and the game doesn't offer you any kind of way to upgrade your inventory, like, why do you make it like that? Like, there's no way this game is designed for healing items in mind. It's designed for no damage in mind. In fact, it just feels like the survival horror way to do it, because you're displaying, like, skillful use of your resources to not be so reliant upon healing items. Like, if you're just going to be so reliant upon healing items, then you're just going to be mindlessly going through the game, and it's just going to be child's play. It's just going to be very childish. It's almost like just mashing the button in those fighting games and just getting very easy results on the enemies. I mean, at times I can be accepting of it because, there are certain broken enemies in those kind of games that you need to mash in order to deal with them. But when you're talking about a skill-based combat system and it's just entirely based around mashing, that right there is just, it's mind-numbing. And healing items are just a mind-numbing thing in a game. And I still find it very odd that my friend, Fascinator, he tries to think very differently about the whole idea of healing items, and he says that, it just seems very odd for people to do no damage in these kind of games and just completely ignore the healing items, yet it's just, it's just such a controversial statement to make, and it doesn't sit right with me when Fascinator makes those kind of statements, and he made this statement in my Resident Evil 6 walkthrough. So I just really wish that he would give a little bit more thought before he actually posted such comments like that. Because when I first read that, it didn't sit right with me, and it felt a little awkward in his presentation. So that's all I'll say about that, but going back to my main point, surely the developers didn't design the whole knife-only restriction with the trophy in mind for healing items, because if they did, that right there is just, yet again, another cheap shortcut to getting a restriction done, and it forces you to make the gameplay look awkward, it forces you to not take the game seriously. It allows the developers to get away with very lazy designs and badly designed mechanics, and it just goes against the very nature of skillful play. And you don't get this kind of mentality in games like Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, 7, and Village. Revelations, you do get it because that game has some problems given the fact that it released on inferior hardware, and the team that developed it, ironically being the Resident Evil 7 team, didn't really know how to make the game feel less clunky and cumbersome and actually well designed. Even so, Revelations 1 is a very fun game. But, yeah, this is the end of this walkthrough. Yeah, not much to really say because this game is a walk in the park. And anyone who struggles with this game, what are you talking about? But that is the end of this walkthrough. Stay tuned for Chris's walkthrough. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.